Sure. So this week's topic is preparing for the worst, lessons learned. And by that I mean, when are times that you've maybe tried to prepare for the worst and it may have succeeded, so you may have done it on a spreadsheet, or maybe it blew up in your face, or maybe you know of stories of where it never really worked out. A few stories really come to mind in my old job. They used to to password protect the spreadsheet files all the time, and they would forget the password. So if they password protected the sheet, I was able to hack it and help them. And they said, "Oh, well, that's not secure." So they actually password protect the file in the end, and then nobody could hack in. That was not. No one was able to fix that. So this week's and what you learned from it and about it. So take it away, anyone. Jump in, anyone.
Well, preparing for the worst, I just think about, starting a freelance and not knowing what was waiting for me, and then realizing that that's what I was supposed to do was walk into situations, not knowing what was going on. The client didn't know what was going on, so I just had to just kind of man up, just go on in there and accept that there was going to be some mystery.
Well, so when I know we were talking earlier about how do you prepare. So I said, well, what do you do about presentations where you want to do this amount of material, but this is the amount of time you have? So what I've learned, at least as far as training goes, is I'll put those on a backup slide because I can anticipate that those are always, I shouldn't say always, but those are often the questions that are going to be asked after the training. So I'll put those on a backup slide, anticipating someone will almost always raise their hand and say, well, have you thought of this? And I say, yes, I have thought of this, because you are maybe the 20th person to ask me, and after about the 10th person, I realized that I needed to do something about it. So those are things that I like to do, and I like to prepare and tell other people to prepare ahead for.
Yeah, I'd like to hit on a few things. And what I'm going to bring up here probably isn't unique to Excel. It's probably a common in any sort of developments, but I think it applies here as well. And I really see kind of in preparing for the worst in development, there's kind of three main things that I look at, and this includes Excel development. Number one is preparing an appropriate structure. And by that I mean, even in our last episode where I talked about, you got your inputs, you got your formulas, you got your outputs, or some sort of a structure that allows you to not get screwed. that is easy for somebody to kind of to pick up and to move forward with, and so to some extent you're able to prepare for the worst because somebody else is able to pick up that spreadsheet. I'll say number two, and Jordan, you brought this up in one of our early tips in this series, which was around versioning. How do you, and you could almost say this is save early, save often, which is a little too easy. So you could almost say that, and we could be done with the show.
Yeah.
But to what extent do you bring up your file? You make a version for that day. You make it in a way that's easy to understand, etc. So that's another way. You got to make sure that you're preparing for the worst in doing that. But number three, which is one that I don't think that people think about a lot, and it might be a little bit more germane to the business intelligence environment, to where you're dealing with databases, but I also think that it applies here, which is pushing your formulas down to the lowest common area. As an example, do you write a formula in 15 different areas, or do you write the formula in one area and then just address that calculation in multiple different places, so that whenever you change it once, it cascades through everywhere? And I think, and to some extent, preparing for the worst, and here's where that's a gotcha. Here's where that's a gotcha is if you have a formula and you have a weekly roll-up, a daily roll-up, a monthly roll-up, and you have among a time series, and you change it in one place and you forget to change it in all the other places, you're messed up, because now somebody's going to question your data because the numbers aren't adding up. And instead, having those calculations in kind of a central place that allows it to cascade out, I've found to be kind of a best practice for me in development.
It's funny. It sounds like you basically described a lot of the stuff that I teach in my modeling course. And I mean, one of the things that if we say preparing for the worst, I mean, all the things we're talking about here. I mean, what you're talking about is planning, right? And that's the difference, I think, between what makes a good solution and what makes a solution that works until people start to rely on it and it becomes business critical and then falls over. I know one of the things that we do when we go through and we start planning, especially for big things, is we look at planning what we want our particular models to do. Something else that we do, though, and this is something that I actually picked up from Microsoft when we were down there at some of the summits, is I actually go through and I actually plan out what I don't want the models to do as well. And that's kind of an interesting thing because it actually allows us, when we get a whole group of people in one room together and say, okay, here's what this thing is supposed to do, here's what it's never going to do. And one of the big examples we had for that is we built an economic analysis, which is supposed to forecast. Basically what it does is says, well, if your land is worth this much today, what would the lift be if I kept it, or should I just sell it today and do I make whatever off this thing? And we said, all right, so if we're going to build this model, will it ever be used to project cash flow? Is it going to need to tie back to the accounting system? Nope, it's a totally different purpose. That's great. In that case, we won't build certain aspects into it that would be needed. And if it were changed into a different format, then we would have had to have built those in. So it helps you, when you work with those kind of things, when somebody comes back and says, okay, well, now I need this. Like, well, we talked about this. We had a great big meeting about this, and we said, no, this isn't going to be addressed, and we never plumbed in the stuff to make that happen. It sort of helps with scope creep a little bit, depending on how much power the approving authority above you actually has, and that can eventually end up running its course as well. But it is an interesting thing to start looking at when we deal with our stuff like that. So
I think your point is well taken, particularly as something starts to become less something that you're maintaining on your desktop and it becomes more mission critical. And since you brought up cash flows, I could think of just a simple example might be net present value, where you have your weighted average cost of capital. And your weighted average cost of capital, you could either write that into the equation, you could hard code that in, or you can have a weighted average cost of capital cell to where you're referencing that in multiple places, so you just change it once and it kind of cascades throughout. And at that point, you're dealing with something that's much more mission critical, that you need to be in contact with the controller and people like that on how that's changing.
Well, and that's one thing I know for our models. I mean, typically what we try and do is we try and build them dynamic enough that there are input cells that drive all of those key assumptions, and everything is built off individual input cells that are extremely well labeled and whatever else, so that, I mean, basically it's because it's modeling. I mean, the whole idea is to change inputs and see what ends up happening on the other end, right? But that does give us that ability that when we want to go and flip something, like let's say that we decide that the inflation rate that we want to use is going to be 1% instead of 2%, I'm not going back to modify 26,500 formulas. I'm modifying one, and it cascades through the entire model, which is key. So big piece.
Well, yeah, and so you do get me thinking about this. Around development and preparing for the worst. And usually, I'm dealing with one person, a few people, a small office, and I've got to ask a lot of questions about what a tool is meant to do, who's going to be modifying it, because that determines what needs to happen to it, right? What the level of validation and automation that have to go in it, looking at their budget, and then I get the complaint about, does it have to be so complicated? Does it have to be so expensive? Okay, well, we've got somebody who is not familiar with Excel. They've got something that is critical. They're managing expenses or something. And I am not going to cut corners and send them something with no validation, and then they've put a date where like a hotel room should go, that the name of the hotel or whatever, or the amount or something. No, I'm putting all that validation in. And then if they want all these reports and everything, we have to have a conversation, okay? We're going to have to build in some training here, or it's going to be a whole lot for me to automate all those charts that you want. So do you really need all of that? And then, finding that area where they have some choice and they don't have some choice. Me not putting validation in, they don't have a choice. All the graphs and extra stuff, then that's where they have a choice. But that is preparing for the worst, because I do not want to have somebody send something to somebody that then gets mad because it's wrong, and then they come back to ours.
Yeah, that's one piece that I wish we'd see some more investment from the Excel side is on data validation. Man, there's 100 things we could do in that area that I would love to see, especially when you start pushing things out to the web and whatever else. But I agree. I mean, data validation is a massive part of my models, especially if they're going to be handed off to someone else. It's all good if I'm using it, but I mean, if somebody else is going to be doing it again, the level of Excel skill drives it. I mean, how often are they going to update it? Because let's face it, the longer it goes between updates, the more they're going to forget, the more important it is to have those rules on there to prevent them from putting the wrong things in. After all, I
Yep.
mean, there's the whole thing, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Let's make sure the
Yep.
garbage never gets in to begin with.
Yep, and the
Now,
issue, yeah, when you talk about the frequency of the updates and everything, look at how fast is this thing gonna grow? Okay, so yeah, we can build a 5-row thing that works, but then if this thing is gonna grow really fast, that's a whole different project than something that's gonna stay small for a long time.
Yep.
now, I have so I'm also wondering, not just from things that have worked, but do you know of any thoughts or have any stories of times where you tried to do something that you thought was preventative, but it actually backfired? I mean, one thing that I do is, just as Rick was saying, save often. So I have Control S. I'm always doing it, and sometimes I'll run a macro thinking, don't save afterwards because this wasn't the right output, and then I'll just put the keystroke in, Control S, and just it'll save over exactly what I was telling myself not to do. But I've trained myself to do it, and 80% of the time, 90% of the time, I need to be saving because in case it crashes. So anything like that, anything you've seen from clients where they said, oh, I thought I was preventing the worst, and suddenly they have a giant spreadsheet because they didn't want to delete anything. They just kept making a new tab for every new report. So things like that. What has your experience been?
Track changes.
Track changes.
They turned on track changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can maintain history this way. No.
Right. Things like that, or someone will say, or someone will just save every spreadsheet, and then they say, well, I want to make a report. So the report will be those terrible Excel formula links, to all the different files, which are just, I don't know what linking to different files with a formula does in Excel, but it just seems to ruin it over time. So
We
things like
had
that.
one.
I wonder.
I was told.
We had one consultant that built us this massive model for budgeting or whatever else. This is before I started doing a lot of our Excel stuff. And the guy, he encapsulated every different department in its own separate file, which was great. But then he used another folder or file and linked them all together. And as it turned out, somewhere in that whole thing, he ended up with a circular link between files.
Sweet.
Oh my God. What a nightmare. That wasn't much fun, but I mean, he started with the best of intentions, right? Separate all that data, encapsulate. Let's do one department at a time, then we'll roll this one up. But yeah, it nasty stuff. But try to avoid those linked files. Nasty.
Yeah. But I can't think of something where I've tried my best and then things still backfired. I don't know. I've had just situations where, I'm working in the newest version of Excel and do something and then send it off to somebody, and one of their collaborators is behind the times and something blows up on them. Doesn't work right because they don't have the formula or whatever I did in their version. What else? I thought about something else, but I don't know. It's hard to think about that stuff because I kind of just own it, just say, okay, I got this call, somebody's mad because they're in 2003 and I used an if NA, and if NA doesn't exist for 2003. So things are weird. Now I got to go in and fix it. But, when I think about preparing for the worst, going in and teaching, not knowing if I'm going to have a fun class, a dead class, an inquisitive class, just don't know. But see, I like that. I like, you just walk to the chute and get on that bull, and the latch man and the gate man open it up, and you ride, and hope you stay on for 8 seconds.
I have to laugh, actually. I'm preparing for the worst with that. I have, when I teach, I've got my laptop, which is hooked up to a projector, and then I've got my Surface, which I have on the side and has all my notes on it. So what probably a lot of the people in the class don't realize is that I have every single step of my examples is documented on the Surface. Every single step. And there's nothing better than when you figure out partway through the example that one of those steps was actually wrong. Oh, that's not so good. So I've had that happen. But I mean, you know what? You laugh it off, you keep going, right? I mean, and undo it. So I mean, there's your example of preparing for the worst. But
Yeah. Oh,
I
You
gotta
know, I
tell you,
stopped doing that. You know, I used to do that. I used to write down every single step on that I was going to do for a presentation, and then because I realized I was skipping things or I was sort of kind of improvising on the spot, that was my lesson. I was like, you know what? I just got to practice it beforehand, get a good handle on what I'm going to do, and then just go out and do it. No step by steps, because I'll just ruin my like train of thought. So
I'm a little bit more like Ken on this, and that I don't necessarily have every single step written down, although many times I do. But how I think it's a little bit common is that I'm a bit obsessive about making sure that I'm not embarrassed or not being embarrassed, and just there's something about just being on stage and everybody looking at you. You're saying, "Oh no, projector's not working," and everybody's looking at me, and I gotta get this, and I'm just like, So I mean, I'm one of those guys who show up 2 hours early. Make sure the monitor works, make sure this works, make sure that works. People are like, "What the hell are you doing here?" We got the janitors turning on the lights for me. I'm like, "Hey man, it's 5 in the morning, but I got to prep. I know this ain't thing until 8 o'clock." And it's just this petrification, I guess. Just being petrified of being embarrassed, of being on stage to where you have 30 people, 60 people, 90 people, or if you have a room of 100 people or so, and suddenly you're tap dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, that's just for me. Preparing for the worst on that, man, is just it keeps me up at night.
That's hard, man. But okay, so there's a lot to that, and stand up has helped with that. You go out to these places and bomb, But the thing is, you just get back up on it. And I've talked with professional trainers because I would have problems. The person with the keys is an hour late, and all of these people and me are standing out on the sidewalk. And then they come, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, but I'm here now." Okay, yeah. And then we get up there, and then the adapter between the projector and my computer is not the right one. So now these people are inside, but now they're still sitting and looking, waiting for something to start. And yes, it's embarrassing. I am not going to pretend that it's not embarrassing. But the thing is, when I hear professional trainers say that it happens to them, you go and a projector bulb will go out or whatever. And a guy told me a story of he was hosting something and the guest speaker, this big doctor. Where's the doctor? Where's he at? He calls the guy up on the phone, and when he picks up the phone, he can hear the TV going. And the guy says, "Oh, I thought it was tomorrow." I'm sitting watching TV. So the thing is, that stuff happens, and you do your best. And I'm just learning, as long as you're not being shifty and not being cocky and not preparing because, "Oh, I wing it all the time." Oh, hell no, that don't fly. But you do what you can, and stuff still happens.
See, but do you guys find, like, I mean, I ran into this a while ago, and I mean, I don't use every step in my presentation, but got them all there in case. But when you go through and you teach the same course, I've actually had this happen now where I've taught the same course, and I've done it, like, man, in the last 2 months, I've done the same course 5 times. So, I mean, I know the material off the top of my head, right? But does that make you complacent? Do you now walk in there and I'm going, like, I got all my stuff or whatever else, and suddenly I look down at my surface, and I'm like, man, I'm like 5 pages past this thing. Now I'm trying to catch up because, you are confident, you're running around with it and whatnot. Now you're just like, "Oh man, I just got ahead of myself. Let me just catch up and settle or whatever else." Because I mean that does happen to me on occasion. I don't think most people notice or care all that much, but does that happen to you guys or?
I would say not. I actually like it. I mean, the first few times.
Can you summarize it again for me? Because I didn't catch like the essence of it.
So I mean, like you say, I'm teaching the same thing 5 days out of the last like 30, right? Yeah. So I walk in there now and I present, and I'm so comfortable with my material. Next thing I know, I look down at my notes. I'm like, my notes are 5 pages behind where I am because I kept on forgetting to flip them because I'm like already running down the path, and now I've got to rein myself back in to get back on target, right?
Gotcha.
So
Right. Okay.
Jordan doesn't do that because Jordan just like flies by the seat of his pants through the whole thing. So
Well, the first few I do that. Like I have to do it. The first one I'm really anxious, so I have to outline everything. So what I was saying, like what Rick was saying, checking out the spot early. So I try to do that. My old job, I used to do stuff with the government. So some of these rooms I couldn't get into early, and then I'd get in, and they wouldn't have the right cords, and then they're like, you can't plug your laptop in, and you have to burn it to a CD, and we have to make sure the CD is approved. This actually, I did one at the Pentagon. This happened. They're like, oh, it's going to be in this room, and then it wasn't. It was in a different room. And that one was just like everyone was just staring at me, and I felt my face like on fire. But it all actually worked out for the best. And what I learned is to bring extra projector cords. But to answer your question, so that's everyone. If you're thinking about that out there, bring an HDMI cord and a VGA cord and even a DVI cord because they might not have one, and it might mess up. Yeah, or that thing.
So
I didn't have that thing.
It's got HDMI, it's got VGA, it's got DVI on it as well, and plugs into the laptop. That's what I carry with me, so I can connect to anything.
Thing, then.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
That thing's better. But yeah, bring backup. Don't rely on them. But to answer your question, I like it when I'm at that point because then I can improvise. Because then I can just really just like, once I'm at that point, I'm like, forget these notes. I'm done with them. Throw them out. Like I'm ready to like go and do this thing because I like it and I'm ready to use the energy of the class and I can switch it up. I'm not held to that. So I think when I've gotten to that point, then that is when I truly feel comfortable about teaching this course. So
That's when it's game on.
that's right.
But to Ken's point, there comes that point even whenever it's game on time where you're like, oh no, I just messed up. Now I don't have my notes. So,
my concern is when I've got people that are following along with me, right? You're trying to teach them and they're doing the examples hands-on, and suddenly it's like, oh, wait a minute, I think I just skipped over 3 things, and now their example won't work anymore. So that's the part where you got to be a little bit careful. But I mean, I always build whenever I'm doing my courses. I actually have my Power Pivot course has 9 separate workbooks that are all saved at various stages. So we can always go back and say, you know what? If you didn't catch where I am right now or you're having trouble, let's just open this one and catch up now. And then you can sort of skip past those kind of things as well. So it gives me a chance to get back into my notes too.
sounds good. Jordan, did you have one more thing before we moved on to the next topic?
Yeah. Shoot, we could talk about this, and
No, I'm ready.
What am I'm thinking about the students in a class, and one of the most difficult times. Now you got the 2 that look bored and don't want to be there, right? And I confirmed that there was one guy. He was dragged by his girlfriend. He did not want to be there.
How could you not want to go to an Excel class?
Especially with me and his bow tie. Shoot. Gonna learn something. But having somebody in the class that wants to be the teacher's helper, somebody will ask a question. I say, well, last solution sounds like you really need a VBA for that because it is that. And just raise your hand. For people who don't know what VBA is, and then he's over here in the dark corner explaining VBA. Wait a minute. So now learning how to control the room and bring it back to the front and not from the helper guy, self-appointed helper guy in the dark corner.
I think that Carl Pepperseed wouldn't have that.
No.
he would take that. He knows how to handle that.
Yeah, but learning how to control that room